How dare you come in here and ruin this family dinner with your lies? I want you out of my house right now.
The chandelier cast fractured light across the dining room table, each crystal throwing tiny rainbows onto the white tablecloth my mother had spent the morning ironing. 23 people sat around the extended table, cousins and aunts and uncles packed into chairs borrowed from neighbors, and I could feel every single one of their eyes on me the moment my father spoke. "Pack your bags," he said, his voice carrying the same casual authority he used when dismissing employees at his company. His fork was still in his hand, a piece of honey-glazed ham speared on the end, and he did not even look at me when he said it. He was looking at my brother Daniel, the two of them sharing some private joke that made Daniel's wife cover her smile with her napkin. The words hung in the air like smoke, and I watched my mother continue cutting her food as if nothing had happened, her knife scraping against the porcelain plate in a sound that would echo in my dreams for months afterward. I did not respond immediately. I set my own fork down carefully, aligning it with the edge of my plate the way I had been taught, and I looked around the table at faces I had known my entire life. Aunt Rebecca was suddenly fascinated by her cranberry sauce. Uncle Thomas cleared his throat and reached for the bread basket. My grandmother, seated at the far end in the chair of honor, simply closed her eyes as if she could make the moment disappear by refusing to witness it. But I saw them. I saw all of them. And in that crystalline moment of humiliation, something shifted inside me. They thought they knew me. They thought they knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of. They had no idea that the building where my father conducted his business, the one with the marble lobby and the corner office he was so proud of, had changed hands 6 months ago. They had no idea that the new owner was sitting right there at the table, being told to pack her bags and leave. The thing about growing up invisible is that you learn to watch. You become a student of the people who ignore you, memorizing their patterns, their weaknesses, their blind spots. I was 7 years old when I first understood that I was different from Daniel. It was my birthday, or what was supposed to be my birthday, and my mother had forgotten. She had been so busy planning Daniel's soccer championship party for the following week that my 7th birthday simply slipped her mind. I remember coming downstairs that morning expecting balloons, expecting cake, expecting the same celebration Daniel received every year. Instead, I found my mother on the phone with the caterer, discussing appetizer options for my brother's event. And when she saw me standing there in my pajamas, she said, "Not now, sweetie. Mommy is busy with important things." I learned that day what important meant in my family. It meant Daniel. It meant his soccer games and his school plays and his report cards displayed on the refrigerator, while mine went straight into a drawer unseen. My father was no different. He owned a property development company that he had built from nothing, and from the moment Daniel could walk, he was groomed to take it over. I remember sitting in my father's office when I was 9, watching him explain building plans to my brother, pointing out load-bearing walls and zoning regulations, and when I asked a question about why certain buildings had to be a particular height, my father looked at me like I had spoken in a foreign language. "Girls do not need to worry about these things," he said, and then he turned back to Daniel and continued the lesson as if I had never spoken at all. The pattern repeated itself throughout my childhood in ways both large and small. There was the Christmas when I was 11, and Daniel received a computer while I got a sewing kit. There was the summer when I was 14, and my parents took Daniel to Europe to tour universities while I stayed home with our grandmother, told that someone needed to keep her company. There was my high school graduation, which my parents attended but spent the entire time discussing Daniel's upcoming college orientation, their voices a constant murmur during the ceremony so that I barely heard my own name called. I learned to shrink myself, to take up as little space as possible, to need nothing and expect less. When I received a full scholarship to study business at a university 3 states away, my parents signed the paperwork without comment. My mother asked if I really needed to go so far, and when I said yes, she shrugged and returned to helping Daniel pack for his own college experience at my father's alma mater. The one that cost $60,000 a year that my parents were happy to pay. I left for school with a single suitcase and a childhood's worth of lessons about my own worthlessness packed somewhere deeper than any piece of clothing. What my family did not know, what they never bothered to discover, was that their dismissal had given me something valuable. It had given me freedom. Without their expectations weighing on me, I was free to become whoever I wanted to be. And I wanted to be someone they would never see coming. College was the first place I ever felt visible. My professors noticed my work. My classmates sought my opinion. I discovered that the quiet observation skills I had developed while being ignored by my family translated perfectly into business strategy. I could read a room better than anyone. I could predict what people wanted before they knew they wanted it. I could identify weaknesses in a business plan the way my father identified load-bearing walls. Except my skill had been honed by years of watching people who pretended I did not exist. I graduated at the top of my class and took a job at an investment firm in the city, starting at the bottom but climbing quickly. I learned everything I could about real estate, about property acquisition, about the quiet art of buying buildings from owners who never saw the value in what they had. I called my parents once a month, conversations that lasted exactly as long as it took my mother to run out of updates about Daniel. He was thriving at my father's company, apparently. He was being groomed to take over. He had married a beautiful woman from a good family, and they were expecting their first child, my parents' first grandchild, another milestone that would cement Daniel's position at the center of everything while I remained in the margins. I stopped expecting them to ask about my life. I stopped hoping they might show interest in my work or my accomplishments. Instead, I poured that energy into building something they could not ignore. I need to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever worked harder than everyone around you and still been invisible? Have you ever watched someone less deserving receive everything you earned, simply because they were loved in a way you were not? That ache in your chest right now, that recognition, I know it too. So many of us grew up learning that our best was never good enough, that we were always one achievement away from finally being seen. If this story is touching something inside you, I want you to know you are not alone. Leave a comment below if you understand this feeling. Just write, "I worked for everything and got nothing." Those words might be the first time you have admitted it out loud. And when you share them, you help someone else scrolling through these comments feel a little less alone in their struggle. Your story matters here. The opportunity came when I was 32 years old. A colleague mentioned that a commercial building downtown was going into foreclosure, the owner having overextended himself during an expansion that went wrong. I looked up the address and felt something cold move through me. It was my father's building, the one where he had his office, where Daniel now worked beside him, where I had been dismissed so many years ago for asking questions about load-bearing walls. The owner was not my father, of course. My father leased the space, had been leasing it for 20 years, building his company's reputation on that address while someone else collected the rent. I did my research quietly, carefully, the way I had learned to do everything. The building was worth far more than the foreclosure price. The owner had made poor decisions, trusted the wrong partners, and now everything he had built was slipping through his fingers. I understood that feeling better than anyone, except I had learned to hold on tighter. I made my offer through a shell company, a name that meant nothing to anyone. And 6 months before that Christmas dinner, I became the owner of the building where my father's company operated. I told no one. I changed nothing about the day-to-day operations. I simply waited, making my rent payments through the property management company I had hired, watching from a distance as my family continued to live their lives without any idea that the ground beneath them had shifted. The decision to attend Christmas dinner that year was not made lightly. I had avoided family gatherings for almost a decade, always finding excuses, always too busy with work that none of them cared to understand. But something pulled me back that year, some instinct that told me it was time. Perhaps I wanted to see them, to measure who they had become against my memories. Perhaps I wanted to prove to myself that their opinions no longer held power over me. Or perhaps, in some deep and honest part of myself, I still hoped that this time might be different. That this time they might see me. I arrived at my parents' house with a bottle of wine that cost more than my mother's entire centerpiece, and a gift for my father's office. A small sculpture of a building that I had commissioned from an artist whose work hung in museums. My mother answered the door and looked at me with the same distant politeness she reserved for the mailman. "Oh," she said, "you actually came." I stepped inside and was immediately engulfed by the chaos of family, cousins I barely recognized, aunts who patted my cheek and asked why I was still single, uncles who shook my hand and promptly forgot my name. Daniel found me in the kitchen an hour later, his pregnant wife on his arm like a trophy, and he looked me up and down with something that might have been surprise. "You look different," he said, and I smiled and told him that was because I was. He did not ask what I meant. He never did. Dinner was served at 6 o'clock exactly, my mother's rigid schedule unchanged from my childhood. I was seated at the far end of the table, near the kitchen door, the same seat I had occupied at every family gathering since I was old enough to use a fork. Daniel sat at my father's right hand, his place of honor, and throughout the meal I watched them lean their heads together, discussing business, discussing the future, discussing everything that mattered while the rest of us provided background noise. The conversation was predictable. Daniel's wife talked about the nursery they were decorating. My mother talked about the cruise she and my father were planning for their anniversary. My aunts talked about their children and their jobs and their houses, a constant stream of words that never once included me. I ate in silence, as I always had, but this time the silence felt different. It felt like armor instead of invisibility. It felt like power instead of powerlessness. When my father finally acknowledged my presence, it was only to tell me to pass the butter. I did, and then I went back to watching, waiting for the moment I knew was coming. It happened between the main course and dessert. My father had been drinking steadily throughout the meal, his cheeks flushed, his voice louder than usual, and he had been holding court about the company's recent expansion. "We just signed a lease extension," he announced to the table, a satisfaction in his voice that made Daniel smile proudly. "Another 10 years in that building, best location in the city, and we have locked it in." Several relatives murmured appreciation. Someone asked about the terms. My father waved his hand dismissively and said he had gotten an excellent deal, that the new owners were clearly amateurs who did not know what they had. I felt my heart rate increase slightly but kept my face neutral, taking a sip of wine while my father continued to brag about outmaneuvering people who were not there to defend themselves. Then he turned his attention to me for the second time that evening, and everything changed. "You know, Margaret," he said, using the formal version of my name that he knew I hated, "Daniel was just telling me that you have been asking about the company, wanting to know about our operations." My brother shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and I realized he had told our father about a conversation we had at Thanksgiving. A simple question I had asked about their lease terms that Daniel had clearly interpreted as suspicious. "I do not know what you think you are doing," my father continued, his voice taking on the hard edge that I remembered from childhood. "But this company is for family. Real family. People who have actually contributed something." The table went quiet. Someone coughed. My mother suddenly found her water glass extremely interesting. I looked at my father and saw the same dismissive contempt I had seen my entire life, the certainty that I was nothing and would always be nothing. And for the first time, I did not feel the urge to shrink. For the first time, I felt myself expand. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," I said, keeping my voice calm, conversational, the tone I used in board meetings when someone underestimated my position. "I was not asking about your company. I was asking about my building." The silence that followed was different from the silences I had grown up with. This silence had weight. This silence had shape. My father's face cycled through confusion, then amusement, Then something darker. "Your building," he repeated. "My building," I confirmed. I set down my wine glass and looked directly at him, holding his gaze the way I never had as a child. "I purchased it 6 months ago. The lease extension you are so proud of was negotiated with my property management company. Every rent check you send goes into an account with my name on it." My father laughed, a short bark of disbelief, and looked around the table as if expecting everyone to join him. He was met with uncertain stares. "She is lying," he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "She has to be lying." "Why would she?" Daniel's wife asked quietly, and the question hung in the air like an accusation. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded document, the deed to the property, with my name printed clearly at the top. I slid it across the table toward my father, who stared at it without touching it, as if it might burn him. The next few minutes were chaos. My mother started crying. Daniel demanded to see the document, reading it 3 times before looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. My father stood up so quickly his chair fell backward, crashing against the floor with a sound that made everyone jump. "This is impossible," he said, his voice shaking. "You are nothing. You have always been nothing. How could you possibly afford?" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, unable to reconcile the image he had of me with the reality of what I had become. I stood up as well, smoothing the front of my dress, feeling calmer than I had ever felt in this house. "I can afford it," I said quietly, "because I spent the last 15 years building something while you were too busy pretending I did not exist. Every time you ignored me, I was learning. Every time you chose Daniel over me, I was growing. Every time you told me girls do not need to worry about these things, I was proving you wrong. And now, here we are. You are standing in your childhood home, having just signed a decade-long lease that ties your company's future to my property. So let me ask you something, Dad. Do you still want me to pack my bags? And if you have made it this far in this story, if you are feeling something shift inside you, I want you to know this channel was built for moments like this. For the ones who were overlooked. For the ones who had to build themselves because no one else would. Every story we share here is a reminder that choosing yourself is not selfish. It is survival. If you want more stories like this, if you need to feel less alone in your journey, consider subscribing. Hit the like button if this resonated with you. There is more to tell, and I promise the ending will stay with you. Now let me continue. The silence after my question lasted an eternity. My father's face had gone from red to white, and I could see his hands trembling at his sides. No one at the table moved. Even the candles seemed to have stopped flickering, the entire room frozen in this single impossible moment. Then my father did something I had never seen him do in my entire life. He sat down, slowly, heavily, like a man who had suddenly aged 20 years. His hand reached for his wine glass and missed, knocking it over, red liquid spreading across my mother's white tablecloth like a wound. "Margaret," my mother said, her voice small and uncertain. "I do not understand. How did this happen? When did you?" She trailed off, unable to complete a sentence that required acknowledging she had missed my entire adult life. I thought about answering her, about explaining the years of work and sacrifice and strategic planning that had led to this moment. But what would be the point? She had never cared before. Why would she start now? "The truth is simple," I said instead, addressing the entire table. "I became successful. I built a career. I accumulated wealth and property and influence. And I did it all while you were looking the other way, convinced I was nothing worth paying attention to. This building is not even my most valuable asset. It is not even close. But it is the one that matters tonight, because it proves something I needed to prove to myself, that your opinions of me were never based in reality. They were based on convenience. It was convenient to ignore me. It was convenient to dismiss me. It was convenient to give everything to Daniel while I got the scraps. Well, convenience has consequences. Daniel finally found his voice, cutting through the stunned atmosphere with an accusation. "This is revenge," he said. "This is some kind of sick revenge because you were always jealous of me." I looked at my brother, this golden child who had been handed everything I had to fight for, and I felt something unexpected. Pity. "If this were revenge," I said calmly, "I would have done something with my ownership. I would have raised the rent to something you could not afford. I would have declined the lease extension. I would have found legal grounds to evict you. Do you know why I did not do any of those things? Because I do not actually care about hurting you. I care about building my life." The building was a good investment. The lease payments are consistent income. My relationship with you, or lack thereof, has nothing to do with my business decisions. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but found he had nothing to say. The realization was spreading across his face that I had not bought the building to control them. I had bought it because it was smart, because I was good at what I did, because I had become someone capable of making decisions that shaped their reality without them even knowing. That was perhaps the cruelest revelation of all. Not that I had power over them, but that they had been so insignificant to my calculations that I had almost forgotten they were tenants at all. It was my accountant who had to remind me, when I was reviewing the Christmas schedule, that I would be visiting the city where my biggest commercial property happened to house my estranged family's business. Funny how life works sometimes. My father finally spoke again, his voice rough. "What do you want, Margaret? Do you want an apology? Do you want us to beg? Is that what this is about?" I considered his questions carefully, turning them over in my mind the way I would turn over any business proposition. What did I want? I had asked myself that question so many times over the years, imagining this moment, imagining their faces when they finally understood what I had become. I thought I wanted recognition. I thought I wanted them to finally see me, to acknowledge that I was worthy of the attention they had always given Daniel. But standing there in that dining room, surrounded by relatives who still could not quite meet my eyes, I realized that I had outgrown that desire years ago. "I do not want anything from you," I said honestly. "Not an apology, not an acknowledgement, not a relationship. I stopped needing those things a long time ago. What I want is what I already have. A life I built myself. Success I earned myself. Peace I found myself. You cannot give me any of those things because they were never yours to give." My mother made a small wounded sound, and for a moment I felt a flicker of something that might have been guilt. But then I remembered every birthday she forgot, every achievement she dismissed, every time she looked right through me as if I were made of glass. The guilt faded as quickly as it had come. "I am not here to punish you," I continued. "I am here because I thought, foolishly perhaps, that things might have changed, that we might be able to have a civil holiday dinner like a normal family. I was clearly wrong about that. So I will leave now, and you can all go back to pretending I do not exist. You are very good at it after all." I turned to go, gathering my coat from the chair where I had draped it hours earlier, when my father's voice stopped me. "You cannot just leave," he said, and there was something new in his tone, something that sounded almost like fear. "We need to discuss the lease. We need to discuss the future of the company." I looked back at him and saw for the first time the businessman who had dismissed me my entire life, actually treating me like someone worth negotiating with. It was everything I had ever wanted, and simultaneously, nothing I needed anymore. "You can discuss that with my property management company," I said. "They handle all tenant relations. I do not mix family with business." The irony of that statement hung in the air. For years, he had excluded me from the family business because I was family. Now I was excluding him from my business for the same reason. Some lessons take longer to land than others. "Goodbye, Dad." I said it without malice, without heat, without any of the emotions I had expected to feel in this moment. I said it the way you say goodbye to a stranger you will probably never see again. Final, but unremarkable. Just another ending in a life full of them. The drive back to my hotel was quiet. I had booked a room at the nicest place in the city, partly because I could afford it, and partly because I knew my mother would hear about it through the family grapevine. Petty, perhaps, but I am not perfect. The city lights blurred past my window, and I found myself thinking about all the versions of me who had existed before this night. The 7-year-old whose birthday was forgotten, the 9-year-old dismissed from her father's office, the teenager who graduated to an audience more interested in her brother's future than her present, the young woman who left for college with a single suitcase and a heart full of holes. I had carried all of those versions with me, their pain layered like sediment, building pressure over years until I thought I might crack from the weight. But somewhere along the way, the pressure had transformed into something else. Diamonds are made from pressure, someone told me once. Maybe the same was true of people. Maybe all those years of being overlooked had compressed me into something harder, clearer, more valuable than I would have been if they had loved me properly. It was a comforting thought, even if I was not sure I believed it. The hotel room was enormous and impersonal in the way expensive hotel rooms always are. I poured myself a glass of wine from the minibar and stood at the window, looking out at the city where I had grown up feeling like nothing. Somewhere down there was my building, its windows dark at this hour, its offices empty until Monday morning when my father and brother would return to work in a space that belonged to me. I wondered what they were saying about me right now, gathered around that dinner table I had fled. Were they angry? Shocked? Plotting some kind of response? It did not matter. That was the strangest part of all of this. I had spent so long imagining this moment, planning for it, dreaming of the day when I would finally have leverage over the people who had made me feel worthless. And now that it was here, I felt almost nothing. Not satisfaction, not triumph, not even relief. Just a quiet kind of emptiness where all that longing used to live. I had thought confronting them would fill something inside me. I had thought seeing their faces when they realized who I had become would heal the wounds they had inflicted. But healing does not work that way. You cannot pour success into the spaces where love should have been. You cannot use power to patch over the holes left by neglect. All you can do is build a life worth living and hope that eventually the holes become smaller, or you become larger, or some combination of both makes the proportions bearable. The next morning, I received an email from my property management company informing me that my father had called their office 6 times before it even opened. He wanted to renegotiate the lease. He wanted to discuss terms. He wanted, apparently, to pretend that the previous night had not happened and conduct business as usual. I forwarded the email to my assistant with instructions to handle it, and then deleted it from my inbox. I had a flight to catch, a life to return to, a world that existed entirely separate from the family who had never made room for me in theirs. The plane lifted off just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of the candles on the birthday cakes I never had. I watched the city shrink beneath me until it was just a pattern of lights, indistinguishable from any other city, and I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just distance. The kind of distance that comes from finally accepting that some relationships cannot be repaired because they were never really built in the first place. The months following that Christmas unfolded in ways I had not anticipated. My father did eventually negotiate new terms through my property management company, a slight increase in rent that he tried to present as a victory, but which was really just the market rate I should have been charging all along. Daniel sent me a single text message that said we should talk, to which I responded that my schedule was quite full. My mother sent a Christmas card the following year, signed with her name alone, containing nothing but a generic holiday greeting and a check for $50 that I donated to charity without cashing. The family, it seemed, did not know how to exist in a world where I had power. They had built their entire dynamic around my insignificance, and my sudden significance had broken something fundamental in the machinery of their relationships. I heard through cousins and secondhand accounts that my father's business was struggling, not because of me, but because the world had changed, and he had not changed with it. Daniel was apparently drinking more than he should, his perfect life revealing cracks that had been there all along. My mother had started therapy, an aunt told me with significant surprise, though what she was working through remained a mystery. I listened to these reports with the detached interest of someone reading about strangers. These people who had shaped my childhood had become characters in stories I no longer needed to follow. 3 years after that Christmas dinner, I received a different kind of communication. A letter, handwritten, from my father. It arrived at my office, which meant he had done some research to find my current address, and I let it sit unopened on my desk for 2 days before curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short, just a few paragraphs in his cramped handwriting, the same handwriting I remembered from birthday cards he had signed without reading, permission slips he had initialed without looking up. But this time, the words were different. He wrote about regret. He wrote about mistakes he was only now beginning to understand. He wrote about a counselor he had started seeing after his business partner suggested he might benefit from professional help. He wrote about the day he told me that girls do not need to worry about these things, and how that memory had started visiting him at night, keeping him awake with the weight of everything it represented. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for reconciliation. He simply wrote that he wanted me to know he finally understood, even if that understanding had come decades too late. I read the letter twice, then put it in my desk drawer, where it still sits today. I do not know what I am supposed to feel about that letter. Some days it makes me angry, all this enlightenment arriving only after I became someone he could not dismiss. Some days it makes me sad, thinking about the father he might have been if he had figured this out sooner. Most days I do not think about it at all. My life has become too full of other things. I own buildings in 3 cities now. I sit on the boards of companies that do work I believe in. I have friends who show up when they say they will, and family I have chosen rather than inherited. My apartment has tall windows that let in the morning light, and I have learned to cook meals that fill the kitchen with smells that feel like home. I wake up most days feeling something I never felt as a child. Content. Not deliriously happy, not triumphant, just content. At peace with who I am and what I have built. It turns out that is enough. My father's building, the one that started all of this, has become just another line item in my portfolio. I sold it 2 years ago to a development company that had better plans for the space than I did. My father's company had to relocate, finding new offices in a less prestigious part of the city, and I heard through the grapevine that the move had been difficult. But by then, I had stopped tracking their movements, stopped caring about the symbolic power of owning something they needed. The satisfaction I thought I would feel had never materialized, and eventually I realized I was holding on to the building for reasons that had nothing to do with good business sense. Selling it was a relief. One more tie cut. One more anchor lifted. One more step toward a life that was entirely my own, built on foundations that had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. I think sometimes about that little girl, the one who came downstairs on her birthday expecting celebration and found only indifference. I think about what I would tell her if I could reach back through the years. I would tell her that the pain she is feeling is real and it matters, and it is not her fault. I would tell her that the people who are supposed to love her have failed, not because of anything she did, but because of something broken in them. I would tell her that she will spend years trying to earn what should have been freely given, and those years will hurt, but they will also forge her into someone remarkable. And I would tell her that one day she will sit in an apartment she owns in a city she loves, surrounded by people who chose her, and she will realize that the family who forgot her birthdays actually gave her something valuable. They gave her the freedom to become herself. They gave her the motivation to build something better. They gave her the proof, written in every achievement they ignored, that she was never the problem. She was always the solution they were too blind to see. Boundaries are not punishments. They are not revenge. They are simply the lines we draw to protect what matters most, which is the self we had to fight to become. My family spent my childhood drawing lines around who belonged and who did not, and I spent my adulthood learning that their lines were never the ones that mattered. Now I draw my own lines. I decide who gets access to my time, my energy, my heart. I choose my family based on how they treat me, not on who happened to give birth to me. And when I sign my name on documents that shape the futures of buildings and companies and investments, I remember that little girl who was told she did not need to worry about these things. I was wrong, I tell her silently. I worried about all of it. And look what happened. The phone on my desk buzzes sometimes with calls from area codes I recognize. I let them go to voicemail. Sometimes there are messages. Voices from a past that feels increasingly like a story that happened to someone else. My mother called last month, her voice thin and uncertain, saying she would like to visit if I would allow it. She did not demand. She did not assume. She asked, which is more than she ever did when I was growing up. I have not called her back yet. I am not sure if I will. Not because I am angry, not anymore, but because I am not sure what we would say to each other. She spent my entire childhood looking past me, and now she wants to look at me. And I am not sure I want to be seen by someone who had so many chances to see me before. Maybe I will call her eventually. Maybe I will let her visit, and we will sit in my beautiful apartment and drink tea and make awkward conversation about the weather. Maybe she will apologize and I will accept it, and we will build something new from the rubble of what came before. Or maybe I will keep letting her calls go to voicemail, protecting the peace I have built from people who once disturbed it simply by existing. Both options are available to me. Both options are valid. The choice is mine, and that is the point. The view from my window tonight shows a city sparkling with lights, millions of lives playing out in buildings I may or may not own, stories I will never know. Somewhere out there, a child is feeling invisible in her own home. Somewhere out there, someone is wondering if they will ever be enough for people who have already decided they are not. Somewhere out there, a parent is making the same mistakes mine made, building hierarchies of children, allocating love like a limited resource, creating wounds that will take decades to heal. I cannot reach them. I cannot save them. All I can do is tell my story and hope that somewhere, someone who needs to hear it, finds their way to these words. You are not crazy. You are not too sensitive. What you felt was real, and you deserve so much more than the scraps they gave you. The world is enormous and filled with people who will choose you, who will celebrate you, who will remember your birthday without being reminded. Go find them. Build a life that does not depend on the approval of people who were never going to give it. And when you sign your name on documents that shape your future, remember that you were always capable of this. They just did not want you to know. Some doors stay closed because the people on the other side showed you exactly who they were, and you finally believed them. Some doors stay closed because you built better doors, with better views, in neighborhoods where you actually want to live. And some doors stay closed simply because you no longer need to knock. I used to dream about the day my family would finally see me. Now I dream about buildings and investments and the faces of people who love me without conditions. The dreams are better now, quieter, full of morning light and the smell of coffee and the comfortable silence of a life well lived. I do not miss the old dreams. I do not miss hoping for things that were never going to happen. I do not miss being the invisible one because I am not invisible anymore. I am standing right here, in full view of everyone who matters, and the ones who cannot see me were never looking in the first place. That is their loss. It used to be mine, but not anymore. Not ever again.